Welcome to Paul's Passive House. If you've been following along, then you know that I'm now framing the interior of my walls. I've been cutting out these OSB strips and installing them as if they were studs. This gives me the kind of structure I need to attach drywall and electrical. Here we see the air duct sealer that I'm using, and as you can see, this product is a wonderful air sealer and water sealer. This is a watertight, airtight, paint-on duct sealer. And here you see the structure that I built. This is the interior framing. I've essentially recreated the wall on the inside of this insulation. I've sealed all the seams of this foam insulation and all the seams of the framing that I put on the inside. Now this isn't completely done, but my strategy was to paint all these corners with sealer, cover up all the screw holes with sealer, and essentially that makes this an airtight barrier. Here's one of my walls completely framed in. You can see I've recreated all the studs on the interior of this wall. Sandwiched between these studs and the original studs is 3.5 inches of polyiso foam, and in the stud bays, as you've seen, is mineral wool. Taking a look here, there's the air sealant that I'm using. That creates an air barrier, and you can see my strategy for sealing up all these studs. I'm painting this duct sealer into the corners of every stud and all along the top and bottom plate. There's still some holes that I have to fill, so I'm gonna have to use 2 coats. This sealer works wonderful. It also is a primer for this gap you see here. This gap is filled with spray foam and then primed so that I can put zip tape. Now, here is the frame of the window, and as you can see, I haven't sealed there yet. Now, some of you may notice that there are wires hanging down. This is my electrical, and to deal with this, I employed a very specific strategy. You can see here, I'm pointing out my prototype. I took a router and made a little channel in the OSB, then ran the wire through it and covered it with a strike plate. This worked pretty well, so for the rest of the wall, I marked it where I was going to put other wires and took it outside to route out those channels. Here is my setup outside where I would clamp down the wood and then route the channel into it. Now, I set up my router with a hose so that I could vacuum up any dust. Routers make tons and tons of dust, and this actually didn't work, but I did it anyway and routed out some of the first pieces. Now, I didn't end up doing all the router work outside. It was just too much work to uninstall and then reinstall all of those framing pieces. So what I did was essentially routed with one hand and followed it with a vacuum in the other. Or I would set up plastic sheeting to keep the dust levels down and then vacuum it up later. Taking a look at the finished product, you can see here that all the wire is routed through these channels, and all of the channels are then covered with strike plates. Now, some of you will notice that this exposed wire isn't deep enough to be up to code. It actually has to be deeper into the wall. It can't be this close to the surface. So to deal with that, I incorporated another strategy. To resolve that issue, I cut out metal conduit and ran the wires through the metal conduit into the different boxes. I also countersunk those boxes so that they would be the right depth in the wall. Now, I'm going to have to use special strike plates to cover up the corners where there's exposed wire, but you get an idea of how I brought this up to code. Here's another wall that's been framed out and the metal conduit installed. Again, I'm going to need special strike plates where the wire is exposed, but that's an easy problem. Here you see a wall that's ready for drywall. I've installed all the conduit, I've installed all the electrical, and I've installed the radiant barrier. Now, I found out later that installing radiant barrier in this way isn't actually that useful. Radiant barrier works best when it's the first layer the sun hits. It's almost like it provides shade for the other layers of insulation. So it's unlikely that the radiant heat is going to pass through my thermal barrier, but it's nice to have. In my attic, I actually installed it the correct way. It's radiant first, that's the first layer the sun should hit, and then thermal barrier inside of that radiant barrier.